Hi guys, Ron here and welcome to the workshop. Recently I got a ton of questions regarding my new time trial bike, and to be honest I haven't been riding it through the winter because, well, usually I don't. I prefer to stick on the road and gravel bikes, so I didn't have much experience with it just yet, but now I've put around 1,000 kilometers on it as part of my pre-season preparation, so now I can speak about a bit more about how it performs and what are the details and, well, how it just is to live with in general. So as usual, I'm going to start at the front of the bike, and this is probably the weakest link in terms of the frame set itself, and I think that's true for most high-end bikes, unfortunately. So the Hanzo was supposed to use a standard 22.2 diameter clamp, and somewhere along the development process they had a conflict with the supplier that was supposed to supply these parts, so they've developed their own system. I think it's also part of a part of the reason, I think, is of course because there was some kind of copyright or patent involved, so they had to circumnavigate that. Nevertheless, now it uses a proprietary system. We've got this flattened extension, and this can be of course adjusted in terms of reach. The benefit of this is that because the extension is flat, it gives a really low stack, so you have plenty of adjustment there. And this sits on top of this cradle that's mounted to the, again, very adjustable riser mast. Now, obviously, the problem with this is that you don't have the option of going to different extensions, and there aren't really any other options apart from the standard one. So that's a negative. However, if you consider that the extension shape is a pretty modern design and one that works well for a lot of people, particularly when the UCI is involved, which this bike arguably is aimed for, then it's not a bad choice at all. One thing I miss slightly is the option to adjust the angle of the cradle. This unfortunately is not adjustable. However, I've done a bit of a modification with some aftermarket parts. So this is a tri-rig 10-degree wedge that I've installed. It just fits. The problem with this was that the bolt spacing doesn't allow the standard arm pads to be fitted. So I went around that using some Aero Coach pads and some drilling. Arguably I would prefer to have the original pads because they have nicer foam in there, better padding, but I'm stuck with these for the moment. The other thing that I don't find really good is the computer mount. So it uses, much like a Servolo I've had before, the lollipop shaped computer mount where the computer would sit somewhere here, which is a position where you can't see it at all when you're trying to hold your time trial position. So I just use the 3D printed mount to clamp it at the round section of the extensions. For these I'm also using some watch shop hooks like I usually do, just to enable more upward motion and better grip on the extensions, and I'm using Shimano sprint shifters because of that instead of the plug-in style shifters. So this is a cockpit setup that I'm pretty happy with, and this is also the one that I had my custom extensions molded after. So this is the plastic prototype that I recently got from Speco, and they will print the final unit in a magnesium alloy, aluminum magnesium alloy, which will replace the standard cockpit. So this is pretty much how it will look like, and it will be ready in around 2 to 3 weeks from now. So hopefully for the second race of the season I'll be able to ride those. So that's the front end basically covered, and really it's the only quibble that I have with this bike. A lot of people have lamented the fact that you have to cut the fork mast and that it's bad design, but really every single road bike uses this kind of design and no one seems to care there. And if you just want if you buy this bike second hand and you want more stack, then you can just buy a new fork like on a road bike, so really not a big deal in my book. If you go to the base bar, I think this is pretty neat because it's quite narrow, so I like that. I didn't really like the super wide base bars on the Cervelo and the Shiv, particularly the Shiv. That was pretty bad, I think 42, so that's just, well, I can see no reason why you would want that. And it also kind of swoops down, so it gives you a bit more drop, which I also like because I'm a short rider and I like to be down at the drops when I'm cornering, or at the base bar. I like to have a bit more drop, so I have a bit more weight on the front end, so it just feels better when you corner and you descend. So that's a nice thing. Of course, the fork itself is pretty typical because it has this super wide stance and a very narrow front section, so that's good for aerodynamics, obviously. However, the space around the front rotor and the fork itself is pretty tight, so it means that I couldn't use my carbon rotor cover for increased aerodynamics, which again arguably you can't really use for UCI races, but for other ones I could have, and I did on my Cervelo, so that's not an option anymore. But as I said, no real big deal. The front wheel I'm using is still the Head Vanquish RC8 Pro. This is an excellent front wheel, pretty stable and super fast. It's probably the fastest wheel I've tested so far. And then for the rest of the frame, well, one more thing that I got asked about quite a lot is that people try to use this bike or would like to use this bike for triathlon, and I just don't think that it's suitable for that. If you want a triathlon bike, there's still the slick option from Factor, and that's better because it has integrated storage. It's good to travel with and it's simpler to live with. This is purely focused on time trialing speed. It's not designed to have storage on it, so if you do add something, it will ruin the aerodynamics. That's the first thing. The second thing, well, all it really has, at least in this size small, is an option for one water bottle. That's not going to be very beneficial for triathlon. No bento box mount, nothing like that. And the biggest downside for triathlon would be traveling, I think. Because of the extra narrow front end, the rear brake hose is routed through the axle of the fork. So this means that this also clamps down on the base bar, so if you want to remove the base bar, you would essentially need to undo the brake hose and rebleed the brake every time you take the base bar off. So that would be inconvenient if you travel with this bike regularly via plane. You can see more about this in my build video, which will be linked in the description. So yeah, apart from that, also in this build video I've showed you all the details of the bike and all the tube sections, etc. It's a pretty dramatic looking bike, and to be honest, it seems like it's working as well, because we've only done a very limited amount of testing on it, and we're already approaching the CDA levels that I got with my fully optimized Shiv. So if you fully optimize this, I suspect it's going to be quite a bit quicker, or certainly I do hope so. As for the rest of the bike, in terms of practicality, I really have no issues with it whatsoever. I've used it in training, in bad weather, good weather, and everything is working just fine. It's nice and silent. Even despite the huge tube sections, the ride comfort is still pretty remarkable, but Factor bikes really tend to excel in this. So I like that. Stiffness is also good. You get basically zero brake rub when riding onto the saddle. It corners very precisely. It's a bit of a different feeling compared to the Shiv and the Cervelo. It's certainly more nimble than the Cervelo, more like the Shiv. So yeah, I still need to get used to it a bit more, so I'm a bit more confident in the corners, but it's getting there. And yeah, that's basically everything covered regarding the frame set. It's just an excellent overall package, and it will be pretty damn awesome when the custom extensions are ready. And yeah, I'm really happy with how it performs so far. As for the other aspects of the build kit, there are some changes that I'm planning to do, and some that really are a staple and a fix in my lineup. So I've already talked about the wheels. As for the tires, I also got a couple of questions regarding this. So I'm using these GP 5000 TTs from Continental. This was a limited edition tire last year, and it's an excellent tire. Not really readily available anymore, but it's tubeless, holds the air well. It has extremely low rolling resistance, the second lowest on the market right now. And it also has good grip and it's relatively sturdy, so really ticks all the boxes. But the main reason I'm sticking with it for now and what it promises is because of the trusted Continental tread pattern. It should be very aerodynamic as well. Because honestly, there's one more tire I'm looking at, and that's the new Veloflex record in 25mm width. This is arguably faster in rolling resistance, however it doesn't have any aero tread on it, so it might be slow aerodynamically. So really I need to compare these two to see how it performs and how these changes add up to the overall resistance of the bike. The group set, of course, that's the new Shimano 12-speed system in a Dura-Ace trim. Pretty standard stuff, to be honest. The same setup applies except from the shift buttons that you would get on any other TT bike. I'm using it as a one buy at the moment and will probably do so for most of the season. I also have a double chainring set and a front mech laying around waiting to be deployed, but really that's just more of an insurance. To be honest, for the rear mech I have the custom pulley wheel by SLF. This is nice and aerodynamic as well. For the cassettes, I have an 1130 right now, but for some events I might need an 1134, which I also have. Again, that's just a bit of an insurance in case I don't want to go full double setup, just that bigger cassette. There are courses when that is certainly doable. So with 12-speed you have that nice option of the 34. And it's good because even if you don't really need the 34, you can just put it on there so you have a better chain line. You don't need to go all the way up the cassette, so that's also a slight efficiency gain. Maybe some people watching this will lament the choice of water bottle. Now mind you that this is only used for training, so for racing I prefer to use no water bottle at all, or at least an aero one in the worst case. However, this frame is shaped, or well, it suggests that it might actually be faster with an aero bottle on. However, I still didn't have time to test that, and well, didn't have the weather conditions to test that. So that's something that I'm looking forward to. Might be interesting. Then if you talk a bit more about the drivetrain, then basically the same rotor and power to max combo will stay. As for my crank setup, it's a 160mm crank, so pretty short, but it suits my position well. I've made one slight change to the pedals. These are still the Wahoo Speedplay Aeros, and if you go back a year or so, I've posted a video where I'm upgrading these to shorter titanium spindles. And recently I went back to the standard spindles, which are a wider Q factor, just because with those titanium ones the Q factor narrowed down so much that I was getting a lot of crank rub, which is not optimal. So instead I just went back to the wide spindles and pushed the cleats as far outboard on the shoes as possible, and this is a setup that works just fine. So that's one thing I've changed. I'm also looking at some other chaining options right now. Honestly, this drag to zero 60 tooth isn't bad at all. There are some interesting new developments in there for some marginal gains, so I might look into that. One more thing that I'm considering changing is the saddle. Now I really like this Celerio Pente magnet saddle. It's excellent. It has good grip, good comfort, etc. No real numbness. But there's one new up-and-coming brand specializing in time trial saddles that I might want to try in the future. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, the biggest change will be the cockpit, of course, and maybe a couple of these small ones. And as with any time trial bike, the most important work you can do on it is the testing itself. So for that, I will have some new skin suits coming up for testing, some new helmet options, some new overshoes. So, and the bottle, as I mentioned earlier, some other things. Even with the custom cockpit, I can still play around with the stack, which is not finalized just yet either. So yeah, a lot of things to go through. I think we'll need around 10 to 12 hours of testing at least to go through all of this in detail to have a fully optimized setup for the nationals, but it's something that's really worth investing into because, well, it makes all the difference in the end. So this is the plan. If you want to know some more specific details about it, then consider joining our Discord group. There I will keep you updated about all of the developments in detail, about how the testing goes and how the different part changes and upgrades go. So make sure to check that one out. It's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.